Let's take a journey back thousands of years to a dusty valley in ancient Israel. On one side of the valley, a mighty army, the Philistines, stood proud, clad in shimmering armor, confident that their greatest warrior, Goliath, could wipe out any opponent. On the other side, trembling with fear, stood the Israelites, frozen at the sight of the colossal giant. Among these men was no warrior brave enough to answer Goliath's daily challenge, "Send me a man to fight me. If he wins, we will serve you. But if I win, you will serve us." For 40 days, Goliath's booming voice echoed through the valley, his challenge left unanswered. That's where this story really begins. And it doesn't begin with a mighty soldier stepping forward, sword gleaming and muscles rippling. No, this story begins with a boy, yes, a boy, named David, whose main job up until this point had been tending sheep, writing songs, and delivering lunch. If this were a comedy movie, you'd hear record scratch sound effects the moment David enters the scene. Wait a minute, this guy? The lunch delivery kid? But God had a plan, and as we'll see, sometimes the smallest and least likely people are the ones chosen to make the biggest impact. Picture David, a teenager with bright eyes and a sling hanging from his side. While his older brothers fought in King Saul's army, David stayed back home in Bethlehem, taking care of the family sheep. But one day, his father Jesse sent him on an errand, deliver bread and cheese to his brothers on the battlefield. David, obedient as ever, packed up the food and headed to the camp. You can almost hear David whistling a cheerful tune as he walks. He probably thought to himself, "A quick lunch run and I'll be back to the sheep in no time." But when David reached the Israelite camp, he found something shocking: grown men in full armor shaking in their boots. Imagine the scene. The Israelite warriors, men with swords, spears, and shields, were hiding behind rocks, peeking out just to hear Goliath's taunts. And there stood Goliath, a 9-foot-tall beast of a man, stomping through the valley in mocking Israel's God. David, still holding his bread and cheese, looked around in disbelief. "Wait, are you telling me no one is going to fight this guy? You're just letting him trash talk our God like that?" His brothers, already embarrassed by his questions, told him to go back to the sheep. "What are you doing here anyway?" they asked. "Go back to your little flock." But David couldn't let it go. His faith in God was unshakable, and something inside him, call it courage, call it righteous anger, told him this giant had to be stopped. When King Saul heard about David's boldness, he summoned the boy. Now, here's where it gets funny. King Saul, desperate to have someone fight Goliath, looked at David, a boy with no experience in battle, and probably thought, "Is this really our only option?" Out of sheer desperation, Saul decided to dress David in his own royal armor. Imagine David, a skinny teenager, drowning in oversized armor. The helmet flopped over his face, the breastplate slipped down to his knees, and the sword was so heavy he could barely lift it. David clanged around, probably looking like a child playing dress-up. It was like something straight out of a sitcom. Finally, David stopped and said, "I can't fight like this. I'm not used to it." So, he took off the armor and instead picked up what he was used to, his sling and 5 smooth stones from the stream. To the outside world, David looked ridiculous. A shepherd boy walking into battle with nothing but a sling. The Philistines must have laughed so hard their armor rattled. Goliath himself, seeing David approach, roared with laughter. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" he bellowed, mocking David. But David wasn't intimidated. His faith gave him confidence, and his response was legendary: "You come at me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Picture the scene. Goliath, over 9 feet tall, thundered forward, his armor gleaming in the sun. On the other side, David calmly walked to meet him, sling in hand, eyes steady. If this were a modern movie, the background music would shift, maybe a slow drumbeat building as David reached into his pouch and pulled out a single stone. Goliath probably smirked, certain this boy wouldn't last 10 seconds. But David wasn't relying on brute strength. He was relying on God. With one smooth motion, he loaded the stone into his sling, whirled it around, and let it fly. The stone cut through the air like lightning and hit Goliath square in the forehead. Thunk. The laughter stopped. Silence fell over the valley. Goliath staggered, his massive form swaying like a felled tree. Then, boom, he hit the ground with an earth-shaking thud. Imagine the stunned faces of the Philistine army, jaws dropping as their invincible champion lay defeated by a boy with a sling. The Israelites, still hidden behind their rocks, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Wait, what just happened? Did David really win? Yes, he did. David ran over, took Goliath's own sword, and finished what he started. The boy with no armor and no experience had done what no one else could. The story of David and Goliath is one of the most powerful and timeless stories in history because it speaks to something we all face: giants. No, not literal giants like Goliath, but challenges, fears, and obstacles that seem insurmountable. Whether it's financial struggles, broken relationships, sickness, or personal doubts, we all know what it feels like to stand in the shadow of a giant. But here's what David teaches us: giants are not defeated by size, strength, or even experience. They're defeated by faith, courage, and trusting that God is bigger than anything standing in your way. David didn't look at Goliath's height or his weapons, he looked at God's power. Where everyone else saw defeat, David saw an opportunity for victory because he knew who was fighting for him. Think about your own life. How often do we, like the Israelites, let fear paralyze us? How many times do we see a problem and say, "I'm not strong enough, smart enough, or equipped enough to handle this"? But David shows us that when we lean on God, we don't need to rely on our own strength. God's power makes all the difference. What makes this story even better is its humanity. David wasn't perfect, he was young, underestimated, and had a job that no one thought was impressive. His brothers mocked him, Saul doubted him, and Goliath laughed at him. But isn't that relatable? How many times have you felt like others overlooked you or didn't believe in you? David's story reminds us that our value doesn't come from what people think. It comes from God, who sees our hearts and equips us for the battles we face. And let's not forget the humor here. Picture David going back home after defeating Goliath, walking up to his sheep like, "Hey guys, you won't believe what I did today." Or imagine his brothers' faces, these tough soldiers, when their little brother came home a hero. It's a funny and inspiring reminder that God often uses the most unlikely people to do the most incredible things. The next time you face something that feels like a giant, remember David's story. Maybe you're in school facing tough exams. Maybe you're starting a new job and feel out of your depth. Maybe you're battling self-doubt or fear of failure. Whatever your Goliath is, know this: it's not too big for God. Don't let fear make you hide behind the rocks. Don't worry if you feel like you're not ready or equipped. God doesn't need perfect warriors, he just needs willing hearts. Like David, show up with whatever you have, even if it's just a sling and a stone, and trust God to take care of the rest. David's story also teaches us that small actions can have a massive impact. One stone defeated a giant. One act of courage inspired an entire nation. One boy's faith changed history. What small stone do you have in your hand today? Maybe it's a kind word, a helping hand, or a step of faith towards something new. Never underestimate what God can do with even the smallest act of obedience. So the next time you're tempted to say, "I can't do this, I'm just," stop yourself. David was just a shepherd boy, but with God's help, he became a giant slayer. And if God could use David to face a giant, he can use you to face whatever stands in your way. Remember, your giants may be big, but your God is bigger. Trust him, take the step, and see what happens. Like David, you might just surprise everyone, including yourself. If this spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe for more hope, faith, and a little joy.